McLaren was never supposed to become a road car company. It began with one man, a racing driver from New Zealand who believed he could build cars faster than the ones he was driving. His name was Bruce McLaren. He built a racing team. He challenged Formula One. He dominated Can-Am. And then he began dreaming of something different, a McLaren for the road. But Bruce McLaren would never live to see that dream become an empire. In 1970, at just 32 years old, he was killed while testing one of his cars at Goodwood. The founder was gone, but his name wasn't. Decades later, McLaren would create one of the most extraordinary road cars ever built, the McLaren F1. Then came the P1, the 720S, the Senna, and an entire generation of machines carrying Bruce McLaren's name. But the road from a tiny racing team to one of the world's most recognizable supercar manufacturers was anything but inevitable. This is the story of how a racer's unfinished dream became a supercar legend. Long before McLaren became associated with Formula One victories and million-dollar supercars, it began far away from Europe. In Auckland, New Zealand, Bruce Leslie McLaren was born in 1937. His father, Les, owned a service station and workshop. Cars were part of Bruce's world almost from the beginning. But his childhood wasn't easy. At 9 years old, Bruce developed Perthes disease, a condition affecting his hip. He spent years undergoing treatment and was eventually left with a permanent limp. But while his body was restricted, his fascination with machines only grew. He studied engineering. He watched his father work. And he became obsessed with understanding how cars could be made faster. Then came the machine that changed everything. A battered 1929 Austin 7 Ulster. Bruce was only 13 when his father brought it home. Together, they rebuilt it. Bruce modified the car, learned how it worked, and eventually learned how to race it. At 15, he entered a hill climb at Murray and won his class. It was a small victory, but it revealed something that would define Bruce McLaren for the rest of his life. He wasn't satisfied simply driving a machine. He wanted to understand it, improve it, and then prove those improvements on the racetrack. By his early 20s, Bruce's performances had attracted serious attention. In 1958, he received New Zealand's Driver to Europe scholarship. At just 21, he traveled halfway around the world to Britain. There, he joined Cooper and worked alongside Jack Brabham. Bruce wasn't simply handed a finished racing car. He worked inside the factory. He learned from engineers. And then he raced what they had built. In 1959, at the United States Grand Prix, everything changed. Bruce won. He was just 22 years old. Suddenly, the young racer from New Zealand was one of Formula One's brightest talents. But driving someone else's cars would never be enough. Bruce wanted to build something of his own. And in 1963, he did. Bruce created Bruce McLaren Motor Racing. At first, it was small. A handful of people, limited resources, and enormous ambition. Bruce wasn't trying to create a luxury brand. He wanted to build racing machines. And he wanted to build them his way. The early McLarens competed in sports car racing. Then, in 1966, McLaren entered Formula One. The team's first Grand Prix came at Monaco with the M2B. It wasn't an instant success. An oil leak ended Bruce's first McLaren Formula One race after only a handful of laps. But Formula One was only one part of his ambition. Across the Atlantic was another championship. Can-Am. Huge engines. Lightweight cars. Relatively open rules. For an engineer like Bruce McLaren, it was the perfect laboratory. In 1967 came the M6A, And with it came a color that would eventually become inseparable from McLaren: papaya. Bruce and fellow New Zealander Denny Hume began dominating. Their success became known as the Bruce and Denny Show. Between 1967 and 1970, McLaren would win 29 of the 33 Can-Am races it entered. Then came the Formula One breakthrough. In 1968, at Spa, Bruce McLaren won the Belgian Grand Prix. For the first time, a McLaren had won a Formula One World Championship Grand Prix. And the man driving it was Bruce himself. McLaren was no longer simply the surname of a racing driver. It was becoming a constructor, an organization, a brand. And Bruce was already thinking beyond racing. He wanted to put McLaren on the road. The result was the M6 GT. Low, light, fast, and built from the same philosophy that shaped McLaren's racing machines. Bruce loved it. He even used the prototype to commute to work and travel to race meetings. But it was supposed to become more than his personal car. Bruce wanted to put a McLaren road car into production. For the first time, the idea of McLaren as a road car manufacturer felt real. Then, everything stopped. On June 2, 1970, Bruce was testing the new M8D Can-Am car at Goodwood. At high speed, the car crashed. Bruce McLaren was killed. He was just 32. The loss could have destroyed the company. Bruce was its founder, its driver, its engineer, its leader. Instead, McLaren went racing. Bruce was gone. But McLaren had proven something extraordinary. The company could survive without the man who created it. The M6 GT road car project, however, would not survive with him. Bruce's dream was left unfinished. And for years, McLaren returned its attention to what it knew best: racing. The victories continued. In 1974, Emerson Fittipaldi delivered McLaren's first Formula One Drivers' Championship. James Hunt followed with another title in 1976. But by the end of the decade, McLaren was falling behind. Once again, it needed to reinvent itself. That transformation came through Ron Dennis and Project 4. And one machine demonstrated how different the new McLaren would be: the MP4/1. Its carbon fiber composite chassis helped push Formula One into a new technological era. Carbon fiber would eventually become fundamental not only to McLaren's racing cars, but its road cars. Then the championships returned. Niki Lauda, Alain Prost, and eventually, Ayrton Senna. In 1988, the McLaren Honda MP4/4 won 15 of 16 races. By the beginning of the 1990s, McLaren had become one of motorsport's most powerful organizations. It understood aerodynamics, lightweight construction, carbon fiber, extreme performance. Then came a question. What if everything McLaren knew about racing was used to create a road car? Gordon Murray wasn't interested in copying Ferrari, or Porsche, or Lamborghini. He wanted to create the ultimate road car. Almost everything was reconsidered. The driver would sit in the center, 2 passengers slightly behind. The structure would be carbon fiber, and behind the cabin would sit a naturally aspirated BMW V12. The engine generated so much heat that McLaren famously used gold foil as a heat reflector. Not because it looked extravagant, because it worked. That philosophy defined the car. Every decision had a purpose. Weight mattered. Visibility mattered. Steering feel mattered. The F1 wasn't supposed to be a brutal machine that only worked on a racetrack. It was supposed to be usable and extraordinary. In the early 1990s, the finished McLaren F1 arrived, and the supercar world had a new benchmark. Only a tiny number would ever exist. But then something unexpected happened. Customers wanted to race it. The F1 had been conceived as a road car. Eventually, McLaren agreed to develop the F1 GTR. And in 1995, it went to Le Mans. McLaren was entering for the first time. And after 24 hours, McLaren won. F1 GTRs also finished 3rd, 4th, and 5th. A road car that was never supposed to race had won Le Mans on its first attempt. There was something poetic about it. Bruce McLaren had dreamed of putting his own road car into production. He never got the chance. Now, a McLaren road car had gone to one of the greatest races in the world and won. The F1 proved McLaren could build a legendary supercar. But it was still a limited masterpiece, not the foundation of a sustainable road car manufacturer. McLaren had one more transformation to make. The next major road car project came through Mercedes-Benz. The Mercedes-Benz SLR McLaren returned the company to series road car production. But if McLaren wanted to challenge Ferrari and Lamborghini directly, it needed cars carrying its own identity. In 2010, McLaren Automotive began its modern era as a dedicated road car manufacturer. The 12C became the first major product of that new chapter. This time, the goal wasn't another one-off masterpiece. It was to build a business, a factory, a dealer network, and an entire family of supercars. The MP412C arrived with carbon fiber construction, twin-turbocharged V8 power, and decades of McLaren engineering behind it. McLaren had entered the supercar market for real. Then came something more ambitious. The P1. Hybrid power, active aerodynamics, extreme performance. And suddenly, the McLaren F1 no longer looked like an isolated moment. McLaren could create another halo car. Then came the 720S, the Senna, the Speedtail, the 765LT, the Artura. In only a few years, McLaren had transformed itself from a racing organization with an extraordinary road car past into a genuine supercar manufacturer. But underneath those modern machines, the same ideas kept appearing. Lightweight construction, carbon fiber, aerodynamics, driver-focused engineering. Those ideas didn't begin with the 12C. They didn't begin with the P1. They didn't even begin with the McLaren F1. They can be traced much further back, to Bruce. So how did McLaren become a supercar legend? It didn't begin with the F1, and it didn't begin with the P1. It began decades earlier, with Bruce McLaren, a young racer from New Zealand who believed understanding a machine was the first step toward making it better. Bruce built cars to race. Then he built a team to win. And eventually, he dreamed of putting the McLaren name on the road. He never lived to see that dream fulfilled. But the idea survived him. From the unfinished promise of the M6 GT, to Gordon Murray's extraordinary McLaren F1, to the P1, Senna, 720S, and the McLarens that followed, the philosophy kept returning. Lightness, engineering, performance, and the driver at the center of everything. McLaren became a supercar legend, not by abandoning racing, but by bringing everything racing had taught it onto the road. Bruce McLaren never saw the company carrying his name become a supercar manufacturer. But more than half a century after the M6 GT, his dream is still being built.